Paul Burton, Managing Director and CEO of TNG Ltd.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Good afternoon, everyone. Certainly some very compelling stories from the previous two speakers, and certainly some compelling stories in the lithium space completely. And there's many in the resource industry now that can see that vanadium is probably the next element to follow in the footsteps of lithium. We're a believer in that, and we've been developing our Mount Peake project in the Northern Territory for the last 5 or 6 years, to bring it up to the very advanced stage that it is now, which I'll run through the latest updates for you today. See our disclaimer there. I'd just certainly like to first acknowledge the traditional owners of the site that we're on here, and also the traditional owners for the site where our proposed mine site will be in the Northern Territory. We have one of the largest vanadium deposits in the country. It's over 160 million tonnes. It's very close to existing infrastructure, and it's shallow, flat-lying, easily mined by simple open cut mining. We can produce 3 products from this, but today I'll focus on the vanadium products. But we do have credits that come through from titanium pigments and an iron oxide through technology that we own ourselves called the Taiwan process. We've got Tier 1 development groups involved. Clough now is doing the final engineering prior to moving into EPC. And we also have some satellite pillars in the company where we're developing a hydrogen technology which will be applied to the project, and also our vanadium redox battery rollout from the vanadium pentoxide and electrolyte that we will produce at the mine. As such, we have a vertically integrated plan from we own the mine, we own the ore, we can take it through a Benny plant, simple crush, take the magnetite out, then goes through our patented Taiwan process, which we intend to license to other groups that have these similar types of vanadium-rich deposits, from which we can separate out 3 very high value and very high quality products. Vanadium pentoxide, as I'll focus on here, it's mainly used in the steel industry, but there's a growing trend for it going into large storage cells. So it will never be a competitor to the electric vehicle industry, but certainly fill that gap between the use it or lose it of the solar and the wind power, and a large demand growing just for that, particularly as we can see in Europe at the moment. It will always be used in the steel industry as well. It has a unique property of a strengthening agent, and as such, by the higher strength, high amount of vanadium that goes into steel, the less amount of iron oxide is required, and therefore you could argue that it's a bit of a green element itself. It's a major CO producer in other respects as well, and a graph there shows from Vanitec, one of the institution for vanadium producers, shows some of the graphics of the competitiveness of vanadium for sustainable CO2 reduction and waste reduction. With respect to pricing, vanadium has now been classed as a critical mineral. The US is a net importer and stockpiler of it, as are other groups around the world. It's only produced in a few jurisdictions around the world, one of which is Russia, which clearly is an issue at the moment. And so new production coming on stream is essential. I would like to say that the Mount Peake project is probably one of the closest ones next to production. We are almost construction ready. We've completed feasibility, technical studies. We've completed the FEED last year by SMS Group. We're now in a phase of value engineering with Clough prior to appointing an EPC contractor, which could well be Clough. We intend to produce 6,000 tonnes per annum of vanadium pentoxide for use not only in the steel industry, but also in the vanadium redox batteries. We have offtakes in place for all of our products, and particularly the vanadium. And using our Taiwan process, we will be one of the lowest cost producers globally. This is important as historically the vanadium price, which is a little bit not transparent, has been quite volatile. But being a very low-cost producer, we always assure ourselves of a very solid margin. If we look here on the graphs on the right of this slide, the outlook for the vanadium redox flow batteries is very significant, and the demand and the pricing will reflect that as well. About 50% of the cost of a vanadium redox flow battery is in the vanadium electrolyte, comes from the vanadium. Now, importantly, for the vanadium electrolyte, you need to have a very high quality, high purity vanadium pentoxide source. And our TIVAM process allows us to produce a very high purity vanadium pentoxide. I mentioned Vanitec. This is a slide here showing how these vanadium redox flow batteries work. They do work on a reduction oxidation chemical phase, whereby the vanadium is flowed back and forth through a membrane. They're very large storage cells. They tend to occur in or be built into sea container size as the smallest. Some of them can be about half the sea container size, but the other ones go up as large as you like, large warehouses. There are some very big vanadium redox batteries that are being built in China and also in Japan. We've established at TNG a VRFB vanadium redox flow battery business unit, and we are developing up our business model, which involving the government to sponsor remote communities to take on batteries, and we become a utility provider to them by essentially renting out or leasing out the vanadium electrolyte. The blue there is the vanadium electrolyte that we produced from our own Mount Peake vanadium pentoxide. We've been involved with Sumitomo Electric in Japan for many years. This was actually built for their particular batteries. We have our own design for the vanadium electrolyte production, and that we think that'll sit alongside our plant in the Northern Territory. We tend to target remote communities initially because we can see that there's an immediate use for vanadium redox batteries at these particular communities where they're relying on a very expensive and polluting diesel energy. So we're very much in touch with Northern Territory governments and indeed the West Australian government with respect to certain sites for investigation. So Mount Peake then, the key facts for you to bear in mind. It's in the middle of the Northern Territory, but it's very close to the North-South Highway, North-South Railway, and a North-South gas pipeline. Could not be better located from a resource project point of view. It's been awarded major project status by the Northern Territory government and also by the federal government. We have a mining license in place. We have environmental permitting in place for mining and beneficiation. We're now undertaking additional environmental work for the processing to occur to allow us to bring down the end products. Geologically, it's a very, very simple ore body, very little weathering, and compared to the West Australian vanadium deposits, which tend to be dipping and very deeply weathered, this is remarkably fresh. We have partnerships with Tier 1 groups globally for the offtakes, including the Swiss group DKSH, one of the largest logistics providers for chemicals in the world. We also have a offtake agreement with vanadium with Woojin in Korea, and also with India for an Indian group, Vimson, a major Indian conglomerate that is their own iron ore miner for all our iron oxide. Most regulatory approvals, as I mentioned, are in place. We now need to have the final environmental approval to allow all the processing to take place. We have an ILUA in place for the traditional owners, and there's some further negotiation with them just about the final processing to be done. And we expect to be able to make a final investment decision based on the value engineering that Clough is doing at the moment towards the end of this year. I mentioned the licenses we have in place. This is a very advanced project. The technical studies have been completed. Value engineering is obviously a very important part of a project to to try and keep the capex down. We are, as everybody recognises, in a very difficult environment for projects at the moment, with prices increasing everywhere and lead times becoming quite hard to measure. But we will push through this and make sure that this project gets delivered. We have some very strong supportive shareholders, and we have some very strong supportive groups involved, from an engineering through to off-takers as well. So from an investor perspective, the highlights that I'd like to leave you with, that this is a very advanced project of critical minerals, particularly vanadium. We believe that these will play an important role in all resources in the future. There's a value add from exposure to TNG with the vanadium redox flow batteries business units that we've established, and also our green hydrogen business, which I only mentioned in passing. But that is a fairly significant pillar that I'd like to see in the company grow. It's a large joint venture with a very large group in Malaysia, and I suspect that will work its own way into its own vehicle and be its own have its own life. But that technology will be applied to our mine sites. So from the gas pipeline, from which we can now produce blue energy, we intend through this process to be able to produce green energy that will power our plant. And finally, like most projects around, perhaps with the exclusion of the lithium, and I mentioned back then to my initial comments about vanadium following lithium's footsteps, there is a significant disconnect between our market cap and the NPV of the project. This project has an NPV of around about 3 billion Australian, IRR in excess of 30%. It's very hard to make this project unviable. And our market cap at the moment is hovering around just over 100 million. So as we move forward now into financing, which we're quite advanced in, we have a mandated KfW IPEX, one of the largest European resource banks globally, to look at the syndication for the debt for us. And we have KPMG Corporate Finance advising on the equity structure. And we have a number of potential strategic partners that could come in as well. So this is a very live area for us this year. And so we believe that as we see these gaps start to be filled, the disconnect will gradually disappear. That's a picture of Mount Peake from a very small hill close by, and I'll leave you with that. Thank you very much.